Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Welcome to my channel. My name is Ogbanje Joseph. Please subscribe to my channel, share, like, as well as drop a comment on the comment section. So, today we are going to be looking at the supposed benefits of colonialism as presented by Walter Rodney. The supposed benefits of colonialism, according to Walter Rodney. Now, Walter Rodney's views on the supposed benefits of colonialism could be seen in his classic titled How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. According to him, the bourgeois writers were faced with overwhelming evidence of European, exploitation and oppression, but still argued that Africa functioned well. Okay, Africa functioned well for their own benefit and did some good for Europeans too. Now, according to Rodney, this kind of position appeals to common sentiments. That all there must be, after all, there must be two sides to a coin. Okay, this argument suggests that, on one hand, there was colonial exploitation and oppression, and on the other hand, Africa benefited from the colonial government. Now, Rodney contended that this is completely false, that colonialism had only one hand, and it was a one armed bandit, that the balance sheet of colonialism shows that the debit overwhelmingly outweigh the credit. He said everything colonialism did was for the interest of the Europeans. Okay, and when it touched Africans, it was coincidental. So colonialism was overwhelmingly one-sided, the side of the European interest. Now, the following are the counter arguments, to the supposed benefits of colonialism, to Africa. Now, number one supposed benefits of colonialism to Africa is social services. Now, according to Walter Rodney, the first 3 decades of colonialism, during the first 3 decades of colonialism, hardly was anything done to African people. It was after the Second World War that the few African workers felt colonial services, which were even grossly inadequate. Take, for instance, in Ibadan, according to Rodney, 20 Europeans had well-furnished segregated hospital with 11 beds, while 34 beds were for 500,000 Africans. This situation replicated itself in other areas too. 4,000 Europeans had 12 modern hospitals, while 40 million Africans had 52 hospitals. It must be said that where social services like railroads, schools, hospitals, and so on were provided for Africans, it was meant to facilitate exploitation and and only for the colonized workers. Okay, that is actually under the social services. Now let us look at number 2, economic infrastructure. Now, according to Walter Rodney, infrastructural facilities like roads and railways were only built was, where export was available, and absent where there is no export. Where there were roads but no export, it was to move troops and make conquest and oppression easier. Where roads and railways were, were provided, it was for export, and it led to the sea. So they were built to extract gold or manganese or coffee, or cotton. Now, economic infrastructures were built to make business possible, for companies and white settlers. Okay, let's look at number three. Number three argument, of Walter Rodney is provision of capital. According to Rodney, financial capital was exclusively, meant for the white settlers, and of course, Africans were specifically discouraged, from borrowing capital. Now, in fact, the so-called foreign capital was proceeds from slave trade, and the colonies, were the generators of these capitals, and of course, never, and it was of course never from the European countries. So let us look at the next one, which is technology transfer. Technology transfer. Now, Africa, according to Rodney, Africans were not allowed to come close to scientific techniques, of transforming some raw materials to finished commodities. Now, the Europeans did the most technical and skillful jobs, while Africans were relegated to the dirty, odd, and hard jobs. Africans, of course, and hard jobs. Africans never picked skills. Also, industries were located outside Africa, where Africa exported raw materials for these industries in Europe. He argued that the vast majority of Africans went into colonialism with whole and came out with whole, showing that no technical skill was impacted. Okay, now let us look at number five, nationalism. Now, Europeans, according to Rodney, claimed that they developed nationalism in Africa. They were quick to forget that there were numerous African states on the eve of colonialism. That sense of oneness and defense of their rights were well enshrined there and then. Now, colonialism did not modernize Africa politically. Saying so is ignorantly forgetting, the Africa's past. Okay, saying so is ignorantly forgetting the Africa's past. Okay, now number six, education. Now, according to Rodney, there was education in the pro-colonial African society, and it was relevant because it preserved lives and, of course, maintained maintained the social structure of Africa. For example, you know University of Timbuktu had trained medical doctors up until 250 years before the advent of colonialism. So if there was no education in Africa, how were they able to actually train these medical doctors? But when the formal education was introduced, it was in sharp contrast with the pre-colonial education, because it was meant to Christianize, train them, train Africans, to become junior clerks, misguided and, alienated the educated class, and lastly, it was meant to spread the colonial language. So, according to Rodney, you know, the colonizers did not introduce education into Africa. They rather introduced a new set of formal educational institutions, which partly supplemented and partly replaced the pre-colonial African education. So those are just the major arguments of Walter Rodney. He insisted that colonialism never did anything advantageous to the African society. If if anything, it was actually coincidental, because what they did was for Africans to actually, be a center of fueling their exploitative tendencies. Thank you very much.